Hi everybody, this is Noelle from Petitti Garden Centers, and we are here on a lovely summer day. It's cooled down for us, so we're really happy about that. We've got a little bit of clouds in the sky, so we're going to talk about shade, and that's super appropriate for this time of year. It is Perennial Gardening Month, so it's June, and shade gardens, you can't do without your perennials in the shade. They provide so much of the canvas out there that you can enjoy in the shade garden. And really it has to do a lot with the color and texture of the different types of shade perennial foliage that you really can enjoy out there. So we're going to talk about shade gardening and just a few tips before we get started here, and then we'll do a tour through our shade areas at Petitti's. If you come to Petitti's and you've never shopped with us before, or maybe you never noticed it before, our shade areas do have big blue banners, and they have pictures of some big shade member families, if you will. And so that's what you're looking for. If you're dealing with shadier gardens, and I shouldn't say dealing, I think it's really fun and challenging to garden in the shade and create that beautiful space. But again, look for the blue banners, the blue signage, and then you'll be in the right place, okay? So let's start out with shade gardening. What are we talking about as far as sunlight is concerned? Because we're always talking about it and it's written on the plant tags. So you're always looking for those sun requirements. Be honest, part shade is part of this category, and part shade is 4 to 6 hours of sunlight, okay? Just to give you a big idea, your macrophylla hydrangeas, those big, beautiful, big leaf mop head hydrangeas or lace cap hydrangeas, they love that part shade aspect. So 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight. In the shade garden, if you were to have eastern exposure, which is morning sun, and it was streaming in, really going through your shade garden, but then as the sun started to rise up and then of course go down in the west, that's okay. That morning sunlight, if that is what is in your shade area, no problem, okay? And I will tell you that shade plants can tolerate eastern exposure, direct sunlight like that, but also your sun plants can grow in that kind of aspect too. So I'm always going to tell you eastern exposure is awesome to garden in because you can use any type of plant just about anywhere in that aspect, okay? So that part shade, 4 to 6 hours of sunlight, many of your shade plants will do very well in that area. You might get some crispy edges here and there, especially when it gets really hot and dry during the summer, but for the most part, they will do just fine for you. Second type of shade is the most common, okay? And that is what we call full shade or sometimes medium shade, where it's 4 hours of direct sunlight or less. And we find that in our communities around our Petitti stores, where we have a lot of wooded areas, natural areas that we're gardening around. And so lots of times you are gardening under a large canopy of trees, or that the landscape has really grown up and matured, and you didn't really account for that happening. And the next thing you know, in a more mature landscape where you have larger trees and shrubs and things, they just end up, shading the lower perennial area where those plants are growing. So that's okay too. And then the last type of shade is the deep, deep, deep shade. Sometimes it's called full shade, but I tend to this is like the deepest shade that you'll find. And it actually has to do with more of objects blocking the sunlight out completely. Okay, so that indirect light, maybe you're getting some reflected light here and there off of surfaces, but we're talking about fencing and large evergreens and those types of things where you really are not getting any sun down there. And there are, don't get me wrong, as you go deeper and deeper into the shade, you have less and less choices, okay? But there are still some plants that will grow and do well in those deep shade areas too, okay? So keep that in mind with your sun requirements. And I always encourage you to go out into the garden and watch how the sun moves through the garden. Like I said, that part shade aspect sometimes is just dappled shade all through the day, or dappled sunlight all through the day. So you can kind of see it moving through the garden sometimes, but you have, again, limited hours of direct sunlight in that area, okay? The next thing to keep in mind is that our shade gardens, because they tend to be wooded, you tend to have fairly acidic types of pH, soil pH, okay? And so what we're looking for, the range that you're looking for is like 5.5 to 7, which is neutral, okay? And many of your shade garden plants, perennial plants, can tolerate that acidity, 5.5 to neutral, okay? So that's what you're looking for. So if you haven't gone out there and done a soil test, you know, underneath the trees or what have you in the shady area, maybe between homes or whatnot, go ahead and do a soil test. That's always really good to see where your pH lies. And then, of course, we can help you adjust that pH. If it needs to be a little bit more acidic, no problem. We're going to add a little bit of soil sulfur. If it needs to be a little bit more basic, we're going to add some garden lime, okay? So keep that in mind. That's something definitely that you want to consider in the shade garden. Another thing is when you're planting in shade, you want to really think hard about spacing those plants, giving them the correct amount of space, because you want air circulation to move through the shade perennial garden. This not only will decrease your amount of disease that you may see in those areas, because it can stay pretty moist in the shade, but you're also trying to increase that evaporation too, okay? So more air circulation through the shade garden, that's always going to be really, really key. And there you'll see less overall spots, leaf spots and fungal disease and all those types of things, okay? So do try to space your plants out. The other thing that we consider in shade, and lots of times when we're landscaping, is you want big swaths of color, okay? So don't just plant one cute plant here and one cute plant there. That's okay in a small garden space, but if you have a larger wooded area that you want to really develop some eye-catching color and texture in, try to plant in 3s, 5s, and so on. So you have a bigger pool of color out there in the shade garden that can really attract some focus and attention, okay? Last thing with shade gardening, again, is that when you start to get these plants established, you do want to make sure that you're amending the soil, okay? So we have a lot of clay soil, but when you're planting in shaded areas, which again, usually are wooded as well or already have established plant material, you do want to make sure that you are amending the soil as best you can, adding those organic matters back into the soil. So things like sweet peat and planting mixes, those types of things, compost, obviously, adding those in about 50-50, okay, with your existing soil as you're planting. And then that first year, trying to get these perennials established well, you've got to watch out, because you have a lot of root competition now with all these mature trees and shrubs around. So you want to make sure that you keep a really good eye on the watering. So 1 inch of water 1 time per week is really, really crucial. If we have a hot summer, dry summer, you might have to supplement a little bit more water to those plants, because everything's going to start, you know, absorbing the water out of the soil. And then also just keep an eye on fertilizing too. So make sure fertilize at the time of planting. Using your biotone in the hole is always really, really good. And then your second fertilization for most of these perennials is going to be either plant tone or osmocote, and we'll usually do that midsummer, okay? So keep an eye on that, because like I said, all those other mature trees and shrubs that are around there, you know, shading these plants, they're definitely competing, and they'll overtake some of those weak little guys as you're planting them. They'll take advantage of you providing water and fertilizer to them. So just keep an eye on them, okay? Okay, so now Let's talk about the color and texture that these perennials can provide. And you know, I've talked about many of these plants before, and I'll have Taylor Pan. You have got a palette of color and texture with the coral bell family. This includes Heuchera. It includes Heucherella too, which is a foam flower and a coral bell put together. And it also includes Tiarella, which is your foam flower. Most of these varieties that you see through this area, panning through, you will have a rainbow of colors. You will have, you know, the dark purples, almost blacks, like black pearl. You will have the caramel colors, and this is caramel, or I should say caramel, and also mega caramel with a large leaf. You'll have some of the pink colors. Berry Smoothie is one of the pink varieties. We often show you Midnight Rose is a sort of a purpley black speckled with pink splotches. You have really beautiful violet and rose colors there. This one's Primo Wild Rose. So again, there's a lot of beautiful coloring. And then if we flip around the corner, we can see some of the lime green colors, and I think a lot of gardeners are using a lot of the lime green to really get a bright, beautiful, you know, yellow kind of in their coloring, because when you go into dark greens and darker colors, sometimes you just need that shot of really bright chartreusey yellow. So this one through here with the ruffled leaves, this one's all lime Ricky. Love that nice tight ruffled foliage. It's probably one of the smallest leaf types, but really, really beautiful. And then just beyond here, we've got Spellbound. It's a beautiful silver. This one has quite a few awards just for that silver color up top. And look at the beautiful purple burgundy underside. Really, really pretty. Now, what I have, and there's so many more, folks, there's just a lot more, but what you need to know, again, and I mentioned this in our deer video, is that the fuzzier the coral bell is, the leaves, the stem, what have you, the better deer resistance it has too. So make sure that you're petting your coral bells, making sure you find out how resistant they would be for you out in the garden. And the more sun that you expose them to, you might get some crispy edges. Some coral bells are have better sun resistance, I should say, or tolerance than others. So that's also a little bit of an experimentation. It does vary from variety to variety. And some of the newer varieties that are released every year tend to have a little bit more of that sun tolerance built in. So keep that in mind as well as you're looking for color and texture that'll really give you a pop of contrast in the shade perennial garden. Another huge family that does such a wonderful job in the shade is going to be your Hosta family. Common name is plantain lily. I feel like in the Midwest, we just call them hostas. I don't hear a lot of people coming in asking for plantain lilies. But of course, these plants have just a huge following, and oh my gosh, there's so many varieties. It's really hard to keep them straight. I have a really, really hard time with it. And I do really, really enjoy hostas. What you're looking for, basic color families, there's usually your yellow color family, your green color family, your blue color family, and then your variegated. And your variegated can be everything from a simple green with a white edge to a reverse where you have a green edge with a white center, okay? But there are gold variegated and blue variegated, and there's just so many wonderful, beautiful types. Here's the thing with Hosta. They're super tough. They are wonderful in those wooded areas where you have a lot of root competition from, gosh, you know, maple trees and everything else. They can tolerate that. They are really, really tough, really easy to get established. They are great for erosion control. Wonderful, wonderful plants. blooming. They produce anywhere from lavender to bright white, beautiful trumpet flowers. The hummingbirds love them, the bees love them, so great for pollinators in the shade garden. But I'm going to tell you, they are probably the deer's favorite food. So it's hard because you want to love them and you don't want to have to necessarily take care of them because they really don't need a lot of care, except they need protection from deer browsing. Okay, so keep that in mind. In wet areas, you'll have to protect them from snails. Okay, but some of them, or I should say slugs or snails, some of them are slug resistant too. So you can look for varieties that have more of a vase shape to them, that aren't more weeping or mounded like that, that have a thicker foliage substance to them. Many of the blue hostas have this thicker foliage that's pretty slug resistant. So look for those. Hostas have a lot of wonderful variety to them, and I just love the diversity of them. So let me show you some of the really beautiful varieties. You've got something that's a classic giant variety. This is Sum and Substance. And it has that beautiful, again, chartreuse. When we're introducing this bright green yellow into the shade garden, it just instantly makes an impact, brings in some light, it seems like. So this is a great, great plant. Very, very large. Give it some space to bloom and really bust out for you. Huge trumpet flowers, really long, lovely scapes on this plant. So something like that would be almost like a specimen, really making a big interest. And when you have these giant hosta, one's really good. I know I said multiples before. If you plant multiples of Sum and Substance, that's like a wow. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you have the space, it would be a beautiful plant. This one that's variegated, this is a smaller hosta. Actually, this is Minuteman. It's kind of a small to medium size mounded hosta. Beautiful dark green leaf, obviously, pretty white edge. The one right next to it, I think, is Patriot. Yeah, Patriot. They're really similar, a little bit different. Patriot tends to have a thicker margin on the side. With these guys, they are nice, like one of those hostas that you can put just about anywhere. They're sun tolerant. They stay clean. They look beautiful year round. They have great flowering on them, and you can just leave them alone, except for protect them from deer. That's the only thing, but they really do a nice job just about in any spot in the landscape, so they stay nice and clean. Let's move over to some of the blue varieties. This is a classic blue. This is Halcyon, and Halcyon is a beautiful thick leaf blue. As I mentioned, your blue varieties tend to have a little bit more thickness to them. Very, very slug resistant with Halcyon. Halcyon has an upright to weeping shape to it. Beautiful lavender trumpet flowers, just classic, just really, really nice, medium size, really, really pretty. And again, you see the color variation from the blues to the greens to the yellows again. So there's just so many beautiful ones. And I tell you folks, there's some fragrant varieties out there too, like guacamole. Guacamole is one of my favorites. It's a yellow with a green edge. It's a cool plant. Bright white trumpets, really fragrant, just awesome. But there's so many wonderful ones. Another big shade garden perennial family that we like to talk about is Astilbe. And Astilbe for mid-season color in the shade garden, you really can't beat it. You can't beat the foliage texture of Astilbe too, because it is so ferny. But when you look at the intricacies of the actual leaf and the actual stems of the plant, that provides colorful interest as well. And then of course you get the blooming with their beautiful spike flowers, all different colors, really carrying us through the reds, the purples, the pinks, the white, variations, but they are just a great blooming group for us. And you do, same thing with Hosta, same thing with coral bells that I forgot to mention, is that you have the early bloomers, mid, and also late bloomers with those families. And so again, you just depending on variety, you're finding some of the blooming interest moving throughout the growing season. And that's great. That's wonderful too, to try to keep that color and that flower going. But again, you're backed up by wonderful foliage, texture and color. So it's a great thing to have in the shade garden. So this pink right here, this is all Maggie Daly, beautiful. When Maggie Daly comes out, she really is kind of a lighter pink. So I think probably like this, Taylor. And then as she moves and matures, that's where you get more of that deeper pink color. You almost get a little bit of violet color in the flower. She's just a beautiful Astilbe variety. Really hardy, really wonderful. The Astilbes, the one way you can go wrong with Astilbes is let them dry out. So don't let your Astilbe dry out. They don't want to be sopping wet, but they would like to be just continuously evenly moist, okay? So that's where you want to be with the Astilbe. That makes them a great shade garden plant, but also good in clay soil like what we have here in Northeast Ohio. So that's something to consider as well. The whites across the way here are actually Visions in white. So that's a beautiful white there. I have the smallest, one of the smallest Astilbes. This is Sprite. Isn't it cute? It's just a nice little mound of dark kind of olive green foliage. And then you get those short little plumes of very pale pink popping up. So Sprite is really wonderful. It's a perennial plant of the year from years ago in the 90s. And the Vision series are very, very compact, very, very thick, very sturdy types of Astilbe. So you'll see their foliage stays very low and matted. It's very, very rough. It has a lot of hairiness to it, which is great for deer resistance. So the Astilbe family, we rarely have problems with browsing with the bunnies or deer on these guys. And boy, again, you just can't beat that foliage color, texture, and of course, beautiful flowering. So we have Visions in pink, we have Visions in red, which is really more of a violet, if you will. When the buds come out, they do look very red and the stems are very red. When they open, they have more of a violet hue to them. And but again, just you can't go wrong with your Astilbes in the shade garden, especially when you are companion planting with bold textured, bold colored leaves of coral bells or Hosta or Brunnera. So we'll show you those in a bit too. Next big shade family, of course, are the ferns. And I love them. They are just a wonderful performing group for us in Northeast Ohio. There's many native types, there's many non-native types. They all do really, really well. And again, texture-wise, you get that fine ferny texture with them, but the shape, if you look really close, the shapes of ferns are very, very different as you go. Something like tassel fern, brown sort of stems, okay? Very, very fuzzy underneath, and then you get a nice bright medium green to it. Lots of texture here with these, and sort of a low mounded habit, okay? But you couple that or plant that next to an ostrich fern. Ostrich ferns grow straight upright, have a very tall vase habit to them. Beautiful light green as far as coloring, very, very light stems. And so you see what I mean? In the shade garden, those two play very well off of each other because they're so different in the way that they look in their habit, and their texture's similar, but the coloring's different too. So look for those subtle differences. I have Lady in red here. This is a lady fern, and you can see those dark red stems, okay? And then of course you can't go wrong with the coloring on your Japanese painted fern. So again, compared to a green frond, this plant is very unique and unusual, where you have grays and whites and very pale sagey greens, beautiful purple stems. So you really can't go wrong with the color on your Japanese painted fern. And then look at the autumn fern. And the autumn fern is really looking gorgeous. And you'll always know the autumn fern with that kind of coppery pink new frond color. Really, really gorgeous. I absolutely love this one. But I tend to like those peachy, orange, coppery colors all through the season. So this one I always gravitate to, where we get kind of some soft yellows and some light greens, and then that coppery peachy color, and they're just so awesome. This plant is Brunnera or Brunnera, however you'd like to say it. We also know it as Chinese forget-me-not, Siberian bug gloss. There's a lot of different names for this plant. It's a really cool plant. We talk about it a lot, especially for the shade, and it's your alternate. If you don't want to protect your hosta from deer browsing, this is a really, really good alternate. You don't have as much selection, not near as much selection as you do with the hosta family, but of course, the heart-shaped foliage, the variegated leaves, will really not leave you disappointed in the shade garden. It really is a beautiful alternative. And again, look at that bold texture. This is actually Jack of Diamonds. This is a proven winner variety of Brunnera, and that leaf is humongous. Really gorgeous out there. These leaves have a very, very sandpapery like texture. They are very resistant to deer browsing. We call it Chinese forget-me-not because early in the spring season, they do produce those beautiful little blue forget-me-not like flowers. There are several varieties. I think the most popular varieties tend to look like this, where they have that silvery overlay around the green veins that you see. Jack Frost is very, very similar, just a smaller leaf variety, smaller foliage in general, but beautiful plant, great alternative to hosta. And my gosh, you'll love it. The color, the texture, and let's not forget that silver. Anytime you have a silver leaf like that, it'll reflect any type of light that you're getting in the shade garden. So that's really, really nice too. Now we're moving into some smaller shade families, but again, real essential in the shade garden. I feel that they'll give you more color, more texture. Chelone or turtlehead. This is Hot Lips. This is a cultivated variety of a native plant. The Chelone comes in pink or white, and they're like a perennial snapdragon. So they have, just envision those snapdragon flowers, just shaped a little bit differently, like a turtle head. But those work really well, and the pollinators love them, and they're awesome for shade for sure. This little one down here is actually called Pig Squeak, common name. Bergenia is the Latin name on this one. And I'm told it's because their foliage kind of makes a squeaky noise, but I can't really get it to squeak right now. Very, very thick, leathery leaves, beautiful pink flowers. This variety in particular is called Miss Piggy. Okay, so really fun for the shade garden. Campanula, I wanted to show you just a couple of the small campanula. This is Campanula campartica, and they are just nice little like 2 to 3 inch tall campanula or bellflowers, and they come in white and pink and blue, but your campanula family can take that part shade to some of the full shade experience. If you're finding that they're not blooming very well, that means you might have to expose them to a little bit more sun. You could limb up some foliage or branches, trying to open up some of the larger trees or shrubs that are surrounding them to get more sunlight in as well. That's something that you could do. So the campanula are really, really a fun option for dappled shade and some shady spots. We've got some ground covers here. Beautiful Lismachia. Again, we were talking about that pop of chartreuse will always really attract the eye. So this one's Creeping Jenny, sometimes it's called. Don't get me wrong, these guys will start growing. We use them as ground covers. We use them in containers and arrangements in the shade as well. And they'll start to trail and crawl and creep through the landscape. So they're a pretty hardy bunch, but they can take some sun, can take some shade as well. So wherever you really want to put them, they'll do very, very nicely, except in hot sun. Whoa, you'll get some burnout on them. So just keep that in mind. We're really talking about shade here, aren't we? The Laurentia or Star Creeper is a really pretty option for ground cover in the shade. Comes in white, comes in a dark blue as well, but nice and cushiony, really, really pretty. Lamium, of course, Orchid Frost is a really pretty lamium. Beautiful color and texture. You're getting that silver back into the shade garden, so that's always really great. And then your Ajugas. This is Burgundy Glow. This is one of my favorites. And again, you can't beat the green, the cream, the burgundy color throughout, and then you'll get your little purple spike flowers throughout the growing season. This guy is with ground covers. It's their job. They can be aggressive growing in areas in the shade. The shade will slow them down a little bit just because it's not super bright and you know, it will slow them down, but they'll still start to fill in areas for you. And with the 4 of these, I think, again, if you are actively digging, dividing, and moving them around, you're going to be fine. You can dig these plants up. They really have not been a problem, you know, to control and keep in check. They do their thing the way that they're supposed to and fill in, okay? The green leaf here, I showed this one on the deer resistant video, but this perennial is phenomenal, guys. This is Aralia Sun King, and it is just a lovely burst of chartreuse foliage, but I'm going to tell you, it is just really easy. You don't have to touch it. Once you plant it and water it, make sure it's established, that plant just does its thing, and it is phenomenal. The white behind it here is Obedient Plant. Again, Obedient Plant is not necessarily obedient in the respect that it starts to travel a little bit in the shade garden, but boy, is it a great pollinator plant and does give you some nice spiky flowering interest in the garden as well. We also have some grasses for shade. I know, it's great. So the grasses in the shade are going to be shorter varieties. These guys are going to be much shorter, but they do well in full shade conditions, so that 4 hours or less of sunlight. One of them is Japanese forest grass or Hakanakloa grass. This is Lemon Zest. It's a lighter yellow-green. It does have that white variegated stripe down the middle of this grass. This is actually kind of a baby, a first year here. But when they do fill out, they'll produce this beautiful waterfall-shaped mound about, I'd say about 3 foot wide, maybe 2 foot tall. They don't get very tall, but the habit and the texture and the color of these plants, they are unbelievable in the shade garden. They just look absolutely gorgeous. You could put these out in a little bit more sun. Like I said, part shade for these guys. If it gets too sunny, they will burn. So be aware of that. Just like some of the Hosta or Heuchera too, if it gets too hot, sometimes you'll get crispy edges, okay? This little one here is Lily Turf or Liriope, okay? Looks like a green grass, dark green color, really nice, okay? Foliage is about 18 inches tall or so with a little bit of a weeping habit. They get what looks like a grape hyacinth type flower. So they'll push up these little stems with little purple spikes of little purple bells. And it's a great, easy ground cover grass to grow. very nice. So that would be an option for shade as well, even though Liriope can take some sun too. And this is actually a variegated variety of Liriope, okay? So you can get solid color or you can get that beautiful striped foliage as well. Down below, these are both sedges, and sedges are a wonderful option for shade grasses. Again, lower growing, but beautiful tufted and mounding, okay? This is Everlime, which is a beautiful lime green with a yellow margin on the outside of the leaf. Really, really beautiful. And then look at this one. This is Blue Zinger. Very, very fine bluish foliage, blue-green foliage. And then look at those little inflorescence that are popping up on the top. They look like little grains of wheat, I guess. But the inflorescence is really, really pretty. And this plant is no more than about 30 inches tall in the shade garden, okay? So options to think about as far as texture. Grasses always provide us with very fine, kind of bold lance leaf, unusual texture, because in the shade there's a lot of big, bold textures, especially with the hosta and the coral bells. But this is going to be a nice spiky texture for you that'll really break up some of the other bolder texture. We love things like bleeding hearts. But if you're looking for a bleeding heart that has a little bit more color, interest, can last longer, look for the fern leaf bleeding heart, because they can tolerate a little bit more heat, a little bit more sun. So they tend to last longer than the classic bleeding heart. And hellebores. So those are your Lenten roses. You can't have a shade garden without them. They're deer resistant. They're long blooming. You have flowers from usually March all the way into June. We're just sold out right now. So Taylor's gonna flash it up on the screen, but don't forget your hellebores or Lenten roses in the shade garden. They provide you with so much texture and color, and they really are lovely. So always remember diversity of foliage color, texture. That's really gonna help you to extend that interest in the shade garden, really keep everything going, and remember to water and feed and enjoy.